I want to say a few things out first. So I've been around in like the 3D community for a couple of years, and I really want to help out. And I found that a lot of people focus on the wrong things, and I say that because I have all these conversations with people that reach out to me, or I reach out to them. So in this talk, I didn't want this to be a tutorial, rather just a way to find tutorials or a way to think in the way that I think it brought me good results. And I advise to steal. So if you find anything that's useful for you in the way that I think or the way that I approach things, so feel free to do so, and in a spectacular way, just take everything from me. That's something which I would very much like to see. So what you're going to talk about is going to be, it's divided into two, but it's basically a one progression of development, which is the way I entered this computational field, the way I structured the tools that I use and the methods that I apply, and then in this collaboration that I did in the last couple of months, how these sort of ideas, designs, and systems went into designing something for patients with actual needs in the footwear space. So quite an embarrassing and well, I'm quite embarrassed with this picture, but I like to present it anyways. I feel like that's sort of the origin of my journey in footwear and in computation. I used to be a sort of an athlete. I did a lot of martial arts. I ran a lot, and I injured my leg in doing that, my feet actually. And after I injured my feet, what happened is I injured my feet again. I did that when my podiatrist gave me orthotics. I put them in the wrong shoes, and then the application of that orthotic in the wrong shoe created a secondary injury, which was really bad. And that really took me off the playing field of just playing sports for years. And with that, well, that happened while I was studying design. That's really what got me into learning design and going into footwear. So I want to just show you how I started and where it all got me into. So that was the design that I made back in the day, and it's a mechanical structure that combines movement and structure in the way that each star, as you see it in this paper fold, is like a pixel, and so it works separately but also cohesively. So you have a mechanism that you can move, and I don't know if you see my hands, but you can move, but then if you press from top, then it has structure. So with this sort of like isolated mechanism, I went into creating a sneaker that basically takes that into an algorithm. The algorithm creates the mechanism into something which is customizable. You actually take the gait analysis of patients that I had at the time, you take the plantar analysis of those, and then you 3D print them into a working design. And as I did this sort of sandal, I'm Israeli, so we like sandals. I took it into a competition in Barcelona, and for a lot of luck that I had at the time, there were two judges from Adidas in the crowd, and they sort of recruited me into this internship in the advanced concepts team, which was sort of a dream for me. I really felt like I could contribute a lot, and then working with the most talented people in the world, I felt, well, you can imagine what I felt. I felt horrified and stressed and extremely excited, and that took me into this long process of just going deeper into computation in grasshopper in specific, because I thought that what will give me success in that field. So as I walked into the internship in Adidas at Germany, I discovered a couple of things. I discovered that there is a strict timetable between presentations. I found that my job is to simulate complex designs, but in the level that I had at the time, I couldn't really do as they expected with me with the tools that I had. I discovered that the design workshops and assignments, they take roughly between 1 and 2 days, and the designer outputs that were working with me were ridiculously good, right? People that sketch amazing concepts really, really fast and quite intimidating. I found that algorithmic modeling works really well for systems. And when I say algorithmic modeling, I'm talking about Grasshopper and Houdini, softwares like that. But when you do one-off concepts in like in an advanced concept sort of scope, then it's really sort of, it doesn't make any sense. So I started to figure out like what to do, and one thing is I decided that I need to find a process so I can maximize the results that I can achieve in the advanced concept time frame, like 3 months between times. And with that, I decided that collaboration will be key because I can't really, in the time of the internship, like know everything that I want to know. And the second thing was to find a way to compete, with native artists with 2D. And I felt like 3D had a lot of potential into creating complexity and originality, but I felt like Grasshopper for me at the time didn't give me that option. So the third was to identify the stages of the advanced concept process and then try to tailor the tools to match. And this is the sort of way I approach the problem of me trying to advance myself. So I started off. This is a table that I did back then, and I took the field of computation and I put it into three main brackets: visualizing, modeling, and system scale modeling. And there is a bunch of softwares for each. And I think the most interesting one for everybody here to try to figure it out are the ones that are
Oran,
really in the middle.
Oran, sorry to interrupt, but could you click on hide on that like small bar that you get because
Oh, you
we're
see
it's
it.
getting in the way. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the interesting part of this graph are like the softwares that are in between the three operations. So you have like Unity and Unreal Engine between visualizing and system scale operations. And then you have between modeling and visualizing, you have Gravity Sketch, you have ZBrush and Blender in some capacity. And then you have the ones in the middle, right, that do a bit of everything like Houdini and Grasshopper. But there is what I found um, that there are softwares that are specialized. You could go farther in many ways. So I took that into a different sort of scope. I felt that that wasn't enough for me to decide like what I need to learn in order to advance. And so I went into dissecting like what kind of uses you have for computational design, and obviously there are more. But in the scope of like being a generative design intern in Adidas, like those are the ones that I felt were important. And for me specifically, as I already has had some capacity in Grasshopper, like I felt like a thing that will be important for me was complexity and agility. And in that case, I decided at the time to go with digital sculpting with ZBrush and Rhino, and that was a sort of a beginning of the process for me to like really set free and like start to create more intuitively. Um, yeah, this is a cool little thing that I did in the end of the internship. You saw the sandal in the beginning, and one of the things that we wanted to do is we tried to figure out if that technology will be applicable in sneakers and will be something that will be interesting to produce at a different scale in Adidas. So this is a thing I did as a personal project, and it's not as advanced. It's not algorithmic. It's just a visual, a 3D visual, but it's just a way to do so. So I feel like at the time, Gravity Sketch was fairly young as a company, and I didn't decide to go that route. But like, I feel that sort of pathway, that idea is something which is extremely relevant. At the end of my time in Adidas, I went back home, and that was like a very sort of abrupt sort of ending. And I had a couple of like a 2-month period of time that I really didn't know where I'm going, what I'm going to do after that. So I decided to continue the path of learning and growing in 3D, and to do so with just going on Instagram and starting to post. And the idea behind posting is to build skills uh, while I'm designing fast and intuitively, and to feel comfortable with imperfections, with the idea that if I design and I must post in the end of that design, then this is something which will be good for me from a personal perspective. The third thing that I didn't know that will happen, which was fantastic, was the connection to the community, which actually brought me to the collaboration that I'm talking about today. But I want to show you some stuff which is like, I feel it's important. So I did a lot of designs during the last couple of years, but I feel like the interesting part to note is like what happens behind the scenes of such designs. Like you see the design on the left, this is like the picture that I posted, but then you see the 3D model that I did during a flight. And it's really shit. Like it's a bad model, but from the perspective of me trying to, just visualize fast concepts, that works for a specific for some cases. As you progress in these softwares, you start to combine between things. Like in this one, I just took a very simple lattice that I'm made in Grasshopper, and I multiplied it and connected it, and then created a different concept. And again, the two visual, I feel, is something that I really like, but the 3D is still not as proficient as I would have wanted it. But for sure, not something I would manufacture. And but when you move forward, and this is the good thing about consistency. Then some designs you are just they're just right, and you can argue about um, the visual qualities, or if this is a nice shoe or not, and it's not important, right? Because it's just a couple of hours of work. But at that time, making a concept from idea into something that is actually you can make, that's an amazing thing, and that's like one thing that is very cool about 3D design, I feel. And we talked about collaborations, and I feel like this is this is a cool one, because my origins in footwear were my injury and like how I wanted to solve it for myself. And one of my students just called me up, and he showed me this profile of Daniel Petcu, and he told me, look, he's doing cool things that you might like. So he did do a lot of funky stuff. So I just sent him this message like, hey man, you want, like, seems cool. You want to work together? We talked. He's a medical professional. He works in creating shoes like which are medicinal for people who has extreme conditions in their feet. And specifically, he had a patient. She's I won't say her name, but she's fantastic. She's about our age, and she had a Queen's foot, or a Charcot tooth sort of condition, and that means that she has a huge discrepancy between her right and left feet. And if your left feet is way bigger, not only from the length perspective, but also from the width and the height than the right, then you can't really wear normal shoes. And as you perhaps can find shoes that will help you from a medical aspect, then finding shoes that are actually nice, that you will want to have, that's almost impossible. And specifically in Romania, where she is, that's a very difficult thing to do. So we only got to know each other, and like our shared language was Grasshopper. This is like his tool of choice as of mine. So we decided to create a short collaboration of 3 months, and to create a concept that have an actuation potential, right? But it's still a concept, to like an early stage work that create uh, a shoe, which is not only a shoe but a sneaker, right? Something which will be nice for the consumer to have. It will solve the problems, and also we can discover what are the possibilities when a medical professional working with computational tools can do with a designer working on the same tools. And we presented the concept 2 weeks ago in Cologne in IVO, which is the biggest convention for medical shoes in Europe, which was the first presentation ever on that platform that had an aesthetical theme. Like the theme was about aesthetics. So that was the first time, which was I felt was kind of cool. So so working towards an idea, I thought we started to look at the tools that he was providing me with the lathe, orthotic, the wedge, heat maps, plantar analysis, the sort of things that I used to work with. We worked towards finding like what are the fundings, what are the timetables, and what are the insights from the consumer, what is her aesthetics, and what does she want to wear in the end of the day. And that took us to pick a strategy, and we started off with 3D printing as the driver for that. And we said that in our patient, the variance between the feet allow us to create a maximal shoe design. So if you have two different feet, but the variance is not so great, you can actually create a shoe that looks on the outer part, the same, but with the 3D printed supports, you can actually create a completely different inner side. So such an outer shape will be regarded as the cage for our purposes right now. As we did that idea of the symmetry cage, that took us into creating a sort of a low-res map of what will be the design. And the idea of that low-res map, that every point in that map could be changed when we progress in the project. So we created a bunch of sort of ideas, and some of the ideas will be presented now. Like the first one was like, how can we create like a functioning algorithm to create a last, which will have a sort of the benefits of handwork design, but also you can implement heat maps and ideas such as that in order to create the foundations for the design. And when I say foundations, I mean the last, the wedge, and the orthotic. We did make a simple algorithm that we can start to work on a lattice for the orthotic. And this is like when I talked about low-res map, like the algorithm that creates this orthotic could be changed, but without changing the actual design. So this is something like you will see in this sort of thinking as we progress. We started working on a preliminary cage design that to start that off, we took the shapes made by him, and then we created a maximal shape. This is what you're seeing right now. Like that maximal shape builds like a new last, and that last is the outer shape for the shoe. And the next phase was to create the shoe shape. And then in this case, I made it in a sort of way that will be parametric. I changed that later. And then after you do that, what you want to do is you create a density cloud. So you get a lot of inputs into like where do you want more density and more strength. And then what you want to do is you create a lattice that will reflect that, and you create areas that will be more will be stronger in the areas that you want and weaker in the other ones. And the result was something like this. Like the design itself is not that good, right? It's a very simplistic design. And this is what I figured out that after this like initial step, that the building blocks have been defined, but what I really needed is an intermediary step to get the design to be better, like something which is flexible and like utilizing the sort of ideas that you get in Gravity Sketch or others. So I took into Rhino, and they have a new tool which is fantastic. It's called sub D, and it works really well. And with that tool, I started to create a sculpture, and that sculpture will actually be placed back into Grasshopper and then create the sort of outer shape from it, or the cage. Um, but 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 that is also only just for me to be able to create the complexity that I need to really understand the design. Like afterwards, what you can actually do is you can take that sort of rule set and to create a fully parametric design made out of the same sort of ideas. Yeah, you just see it, like a lot of manual work here, but still, it's like a couple of hours of work being done and placed back into the cage and and made into something like this. So this is like a design that I liked and the client liked, and obviously she won't wear it at this point, right? There's a lot of work to be done on the cage and on the design itself. But you can see when it goes into rendering, it really becomes something which is like more complex and easier to make during like using a multitude of tools rather than just going directly with Grasshopper or others. Yeah, you can see really here like the sort of like the design inputs inside and the way like the discrepancy between the 2 feet is just huge. A lot of other stuff, and the conclusion, right? The design is in the works. It's an early concept, and everything is interchangeable. But I think like as like a sort of a thing that talks about the collaboration and about how to use tool. I think that's a good thing to talk about. I feel like more project needs to be like so, like designers like us working with medical professionals or professional with other fields. That would be fantastic if more projects like this will happen. And and yeah, it's a fantastic time to be a designer, man. We have these amazing tools that amplifies us. We can create amazing things really fast, and we should really be thankful, I feel, for what we have in this point of time. Uh, that's me. Thank you very much for your time. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Oran.
Sure.
Yeah, this was really amazing because I think I mean, it was really interesting to see all of the different software that you are trying constantly and kind of like putting into practice so that you can not only express your ideas, like a lot of the times we're constantly talking about exploring ideas and expressing ideas through the software, but through your presentation you gave us this idea that it's really about like testing things out and like just kind of like manipulating and like tweaking things so that actually the software is also showing you some of the possibilities, which is something that's slightly different.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like one of the things that I really wanted to convey is that like like people really need to look like what they want to do, and then like really like look at the map of possibilities, because the map of possibilities right now is almost endless. It's amazing what we can do. Like for me right now, like having a couple of years in that industry, like every new software, it becomes easier to actually work with. So a lot of people are like really stressed out about the advancement of technology, but for me it feels like everything is easier as things move on. Everything is really going our way. So I really stress that people should try to be persistent in their pursuit of what they are passionate about, and go with it.
And I really love how you showed us your first attempts to grasshopper.
Yeah.
Just because,
And people don't show that stuff. It's a problem. It's a problem. People become discouraged. You know, that
yeah,
are not even first. There's a lot of stuff which are really recent.
exactly, exactly. And so, yeah, I think this. bringing it down and like showing everyone kind of like almost all our vulnerabilities, um and like just showing that we're all like we all go through that same process of maybe some people pick it up faster than others, but it takes time, and especially when you're going through like 3D design. Like 3D design naturally and historically has been a bit more difficult than anything else, and it's also because it requires some technical kind of like understanding. As you were saying, little by little software starts to get more accessible and more like easier to understand and easier to adopt, but there's still kind of like this element of we're learning a new language in a way, right? It's the same way as how when you're learning a language or when you're learning something new, you're not going to be the best the first day. Maybe some
And you
people.
know, like one thing that really changed the way I look at this, because I used to like think about 3D design to be something which is like beneath design or something. But then one time I was still when I was in Adidas, and I had a mentor there, Matthias Schmidt, and he told me like he asked me who understand the product better, the designer or the 3D modeler? And I was like the designer, obviously. And he's like, no, the 3D modeler, because he understands shapes in a way that like a designer that only do sketches will have a lot of difficulties to do. Like when you work on 3D, your brain works harder, I feel. And so the opportunity becomes bigger. I think so.
Yeah, you're solving more things as you go,
Yeah, more
right?
problems. Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so I want to, before we jump into questions from the audience, I want to talk about, there's something really interesting here about this project that you mentioned. And it's, speaking and talking, collaborating with someone that is not necessarily a designer, or, someone that is kind of like in this more kind of like fluid way of thinking, if you want to put it in that way, right? Like if you speak with, with doctors, with bio engineers, with, technical people in the area, in those areas, they tend to kind of like focus on different things, and they tend
Hmm.
to have a very different way of communicating, usually with words, right? So I think that, this example that you showed us is really like a testament of how we can all be talking in 3D in a way, and
Hmm.
in that same way kind of like collaborating. But it would be really interesting to hear a bit more of like how that happens, and what are the things that you have been seeing that have been kind of like really interesting that wouldn't have happened if you were just kind of like having a conversation, for example.
You know, in the beginning, like we just texted and then shared script of Grasshopper. Like that was the first 2 months of the couple, oh, maybe a month, like a month of us just sharing scripts and talking on text, because like the verbal language, like we had a barrier there. Like he felt that in his English is completely fine. I don't know why, but like in the beginning, he wanted to only text. So that's something which, you know, when you think about collaborating with doctors or maybe professionals in other fields, you imagine like MIT, right? And you imagine all these sort of like high-end international people that everybody speaks amazing English. But this was a very different collaboration. Like in this case, I'm just a guy from Tel Aviv, and he's just a guy from Romania, right? He has a patient, and that patient is a beautiful person with troubled feet, and he wanted to find a solution for her. And this is like this is like a very small-ended conversation. It's not about like changing the world. It's about changing one person. And like this is the power we now have. We didn't have that power in the past. We needed to create huge teams in order to do things like that. So like so the concept that we just did, it's not ready to be manufactured. It's not even close. But when I say it's not even close, well, if I, I worked on this for 3 months, right? And in that 3 months, I actually worked for like 12 days on the project, because I need to make a living, right? But imagine I will now work a full month on this project with him, just that. We will have a shoe. And this is something that if you talk about 10, 20, 30 years ago, you couldn't even imagine to do something like that. I think so. So I'm very excited. I'm a very optimistic guy, and just getting more optimistic.
I love that. I love that. And yeah, I think you're sharing that optimism. Cool. All right. So we have some questions from the audience. Um, any advice to overcome the sense of overwhelm when learning a new 3D software?
I think like the first step are the most difficult. So persistency is key in that regards. But I feel like a lot of people, when they start a new software, they start academically. So what they do, they will go into like the tutorials and they will try to do the tutorials. Now, if you like people, a lot of people try Blender now, right? So what they will do, they will go and they'll start to model a donut. This is like, everybody does that. But the problem is that you don't want to model a donut. You want to do something different. Like, why do you want to do what you want to do? Like when I started ZBrush, I didn't know anything, and the interface of ZBrush is really bad. In the beginning, it's completely different than anything else that I did. So, but I started shoes. Like my passion was shoes, so I made shoes, and it was shitty shoes, but it was shoes, and I enjoyed like the process of creating something that I like. So, for me, just stick to what you like, and then that will just drive you towards further work.
Yeah, because in a way, it's kind of like it's just getting you to think in that passion and not to think about too much about the software in a way.
You know, like people that play music, they know like there is a simple truth. Like everybody can play the piano, really everybody. Like the difference, like you can achieve a very good skill at playing the piano. But what you need to do is you need to work at this for thousands of hours, and that people can't do. They cannot work for thousands of hours. That's the most difficult part. What you need to do is you need to find a way for you to be persistent. And for me, my way for persistency is my own passions. Like I just do things that I like. If I model something, I won't model something that I don't like because that won't have any content for me.
All right. In what other fields of or products do you see opportunities for these technologies and tools?
Oh man. Um, I feel like you can just name a field and I'll tell you it's correct. Like at this point, there is nothing that like if you're talking about computational tools such as Grasshopper and like creating design systems, like the world will go there. Your ability to augment yourself through those tools are fantastic. You can create simulations, you can create iterations, and this is something like I work that if you want an actual example. So I worked on product design, like industrial product design, with like brands that did commercial products, and I incorporated sculpting and sketching and 3D sketching and computational modeling through the process of design in numerous ways. So it starts with a texture that's very difficult to do in a different way, but it finishes in just automating the whole process. It's amazing. It's truly amazing.
Can we ideate on 3D rather than sketching? How accepted is that process in the industry today? Can you? I don't hear you anymore, Owen. Oh, you're in mute. There you go.
I didn't do that. Like somebody didn't like what I'm what.
Yeah.
Where did I stop? Because I just said your name, like, and then
um,
it muted.
yeah. So yeah, we didn't hear any of it.
Okay, so what I said is I think that Gravity Sketch is actually a good leader in that regard. Because when I went back from Adidas and I started working commercially in product and industrial design, I felt like I was at that time really good or moderately good in ZBrush, but then I tried to apply like the sort of fluids process into product, and it didn't really work. It was really problematic. But I felt like as I moved into Gravity, Like that's more accepted because it's very similar to sketching, and sketching is always a process that works inside the scope of product or industrial design. I would do gravity sketch if you want to do 3D sketching for industrial design.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an interesting question because, you know, what is a sketch, right? You can even think about a sketch. Even in comedy you have sketches, right? Like you have these kind of like more dynamic, less practiced sessions where like people just go and like stand up and like start saying something. And so a sketch is really just kind of like a way to express something and like see if it's actually working and kind of like evolve through it and so on. And it feels like a lot of the examples that you gave us today through all of the different software that you showed, like Grasshopper, the like sub D elements in Rhino and so on, like they seem to be sketches in some sort of way.
This is important, right? If you go to a spot and you're like a 3D designer and you're amazing and you're so creative in your craft, or this is like your really passion, but then you go to a place and then it just tells you, don't do it, just work on 2D because this is just the way we do things. I feel like that's not a good place to be honest. Like the first place that I've been to after I've been in Adidas, it's just Tammuz, like a design studio in Israel. And like I had all these ideas, and I by no means was a professional in any of them. Like I was novice at Grasshopper, I was novice at ZBrush, and but I had a lot of passion for that, and they really gave me time. And there were a lot of failures in the beginning, but then as I progressed, they started to have better results. We started to do like bigger and better things because they gave me the time to grow, and then they earned another tool. So I feel like a good boss will be one that you will say, okay, this is his passion. The tool is good, right? The tools that are now there is no debate into if like Gravity Sketch, Blender, ZBrush, Grasshopper are they good tools. That's not a debate. Perhaps there is debate: is it good inside the process of that specific studio? And this is something we can work on. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's very. I mean, it's kind of like the difficult thing of it all, right? Like being able to have time to explore and experiment. Sometimes the world never stops, right? And you need to be kind of like producing, producing, producing. So allowing for this to happen is usually kind of like the biggest barrier for adopting a new tool, a new process, a new method. But then once you do, then you start seeing the results and you can go faster, you can make better products and so on. But it's kind of like taking that bet. How would you how would you know, or what are the things that you kind of like try to figure out before you bet on a software? Like is there something that you make sure of before you jumping in?
Yeah. Right now I'm very timid of starting new softwares. Like like this is like after you're at 5 or 6, that's like everything becomes a blur because like all the hotkeys are different. So every time you go into Illustrator, you just close things instead of like it's a mess. Um, I feel it depends on where you are. Like if you're in the beginning, you should really try to find a cool image that you want to imitate or something which you like want to do, and then just find the tool that they made it. Like for me, the actual reason I went into ZBrush is that I told myself, okay, like what will be a cool image, like a cool complexity to know, to know how to do, and I tried to figure out how they make dragons in Game of Thrones, like like how like I saw it. Those are 3D models, right? And at that time, like I only worked with SolidWorks. Like the difference between SolidWorks and like making dragons is huge. And then this is why I went into ZBrush, and I'm making dragons now, right? So mission accomplished.
Nice. You should have shown us some of your dragons.
Some dragons next time. I try to really be like on point into like the subject, like footwear, and not starting to show all possibilities.
Yeah, but you're right. Like it's really about using those passions, using those interests so that you can train yourself, right? Like it's not like you're a footwear designer, you only need to be doing shoes. If you want to be doing dragons to practice, then go for it.
Yeah, like sometimes I can't look at the shoe, to be honest. Like there was a time I was doing a concept a day, or like every day I was doing a concept, and like after a month or two, I was like, okay, I need to do something else. Like I can't. Like, but then the good thing is like if you build the whole process in a good manner, then okay, so I'm sick of shoes for now, right? But I like the tool, so I it's like a hobby. So I go and I do a dragon, or I do a product, or I do a car. I can do whatever I want. I can just create. So and I think that's the point, right? We create stuff. It's like you don't marry to a product. Like I will only do shoes for the rest of my life. No, not at all. But probably I will create for the rest of my life. So that's like something like which will be a constant.
Yeah, you're born a creator, you die a creator. All right. All right, we have a bit of time for the last couple of questions. There's a comment here in Spanish, but I'll just translate it to 2D sketching says many lies, 3D sketching doesn't lie. True, true.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good and a bad, right? Because well, it doesn't lie, but then you can't lie, and then it's a real problem. Well, but then like the problem is that you need to solve the complexity of 3D. That's the problem, because you don't really have the time all the time to do that. But you can do things like I showed you guys that I did. Like sometimes I started designing 3D, but then I decide that I don't have time to do the whole thing, so I just do one side of it, and then maybe 2D edit it on the other side. Then in the end, it's still good.
Yeah, you use what you have and when you can to
Yeah.
express the thing that you need. And sometimes lying, or sometimes those kind of like 2D sketches that are a bit exaggerated, or like some images that you probably did with a 3D
Mm.
model or something like that, might prompt some interesting conversation. So, it's always a balance, right, in the creative process. um, could you talk a bit about your design process, how you approach a brief?
I think it's very different between concepts, but the way that I like to do is sort of I like to break down like problems into the all the different sort of factors that you have inside of it. So I will, for me, I do not know how to be creative unless I really understand the field that I'm working in. So so some people will be afraid to see references, right? Because if they see references, perhaps they will be like their creativity will be influenced. And I feel that's like a sort of a novice idea. Like if you should look at references, you should look at like how things are being done. So if I'll now go into a project about footwear, then I'll go into all the aspects of the mechanical properties of the shoe, like the environment, the sort of who are the consumers. And I will create a big sort of mind map into understanding the whole scope. But then after that, I will create different dissections into that map into really so I could have some unique um, sort of ideas into that space. And when I have that, I feel like now I can start to create. But usually, what this is like a phase that I start off with, but then the customer, like the person that I'm working with, have a lot to say about that as well, right? So usually they have some sort of an idea of what they want, and what I want to do is really just break down that process in a similar way to me breaking down the field, right? To just break down the process into steps. So you have uh, like pre-concept, concept, design concept, PDL, and so on and so on. And and the important thing to do, like if you're working with a consumer, with a customer, then you need to really tell him those process in the beginning, and then stick to them. Like if he knows the process, like what you are doing, then he understands, and that really helps with a lot of things like pricing and things along those lines.